Our next guest is Dan Meyer. Many of you may know him. But we want to make sure that we get the right title, which he is the former chief of the intelligence community whistleblowing and source protection office, I believe. Did I get that right?
Yeah, right.
All right.
We'll take that.
We'll take that. And he was the executive director of one of these offices in the government that was set up to help whistleblowers in the intelligence community. Not an easy job. And we've known Dan for many years, and he has been dedicated to extending and protecting whistleblowers in the intelligence community. He spoke here last year at our summit, or our luncheon, and he has spoken at many other Whistleblower Day events. However, since he was last here, Dan was removed from his position as executive director of the program in retaliation for blowing the whistle. And as observers at the Whistleblowers Center, we believe that Dan's case is really shaping up as one of the most important federal employee whistleblower cases in recent memory. And it reminds us very much of the struggles that Fred Whitehurst faced taking on the FBI. And really, the outcome of Dan's case will very much determine what type of whistleblower rights employees in the intelligence community will have, or whether they will have any at all. It should concern us all, and please give him a warm welcome and support, Mr. Dan Meyer.
Well, it's good to be back. This is my first public appearance since my untimely departure from my job last November. I promised the DNI I would not talk about my experience directly. That's all going to have to wait for a while. I'm also, as a former intelligence officer, still under speech restrictions. All of us who serve in the intelligence community make a lifetime commitment to keeping under wraps the secrets that we learn on the job. My remarks are my own remarks. They're not those of Dan Coates. They're not those of Michael Atkinson. But I have some thoughts for you today on where we've been and where we're going. I would like to thank two Democrats and two Republicans who've been very helpful over the past year, Senators Grassley and Senator Paul and Senator Warner and Senator Wyden. All have been very helpful in shaping this question that's going to move us forward as we go to the next level of intelligence community whistleblower protection. Think about it. It's required to blow the whistle as a federal employee. Executive Order 12674 says you shall report corruption. It's not optional. It's not discretionary. This is a mandatory. It's a shall. That's why we have hotlines. That's why we have lawful disclosures. That's why we have all these procedures. We should get to a point where federal employees can actually put on their performance evaluations how many times they blew the whistle in the last reporting period. I do that in mine. Your supervisor or manager should be able to look at your record and say, you know, Joe Bag of Donuts, Jane Six-Pack, you blew the whistle 4 times in the last period. That's great. We'll give you a 5 for that particular item. It's part of our job as federal employees and supporters of federal employees to promote a system of bringing that wrongdoing forward. I do think Senator Grassley is dead on target in that there needs to be a White House event, the bookend to this event. I think it should be in February of every year. So as everybody comes back from the winter break, they get geared up to blow the whistle. I do think the executive branch, and it's not a partisan observation because it's both Democratic and Republican, has a challenge with such an event because, let's face it, most of the whistleblowing is about activities in the executive branch. So no matter how well-intentioned President Trump is or President Obama was about whistleblowing, by the time they get settled into office, the swamp creatures start to emerge and start to drag them down. That's what happens. So I've sat in National Action Plan Committee meetings at the White House, and I've listened to the government attorneys primarily who've talked about the ill-advised nature of bringing together people in a conference to talk about roles and responsibilities, but really the White House is optimally situated to do that. I want to take you back to Steve's anecdote about the U.S. Navy and the whistleblowers on the maltreatment of British prisoners of war. There was an event about 15 years later called the XYZ affair, which was another naval problem for us, a quasi-war with France down the Caribbean. They were seizing our ships. 3 of our diplomats had been told they need to give bribes for actions to take place in Paris. And it became a real nasty mess back here in the United States, pitting Americans who were pro-French against Americans who were pro-English. I highlight this because there was a very significant act of whistleblowing when President Adams, through a process not unlike our Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act, informed the Congress of this wrongdoing, the solicitation of bribes. That's the type of process our intelligence community whistleblowers need to be using and need to keep themselves safe and keep them from being reprised against by supervisors and managers if they should stray down the other path that occurred in the XYZ affair, which was leaking. Future President Jefferson, working his network within the federal government, was leaking material out of the federal government to his media contacts. Albert Gallatin was one of them, became the Secretary of Treasury a few years later. And that started a dynamic in our society between whistleblowing and leaking that is very unhelpful for our whistleblowers inside the intelligence community. So our supervisors and managers need to help us create a system that allows for the employees to safely bring the information forward. And we need to do it now in this environment because unlike a few years ago, we are now in a situation where we're being divided by our international ties. We have pro-Russia elements in our government. We have pro-Europe elements in our government. Our whistleblowers are needed now to expose the security indiscretions, the pay and allowance indiscretions that make our senior officials leverageable and exploitable by foreign agents on either of those sides who are going to try to shift the public opinion in a way that the American people may not want it to go. Thank you very much.